And welcome to all of our panelists and to all of our guests. I first want to put some context around the new rules that were agreed in the deal announced on February 19th between the European Parliament and the European Council. It's often said that we need to transform fashion, the fashion industry today. I want to point out that we already have, in the last 6 days, utterly transformed the textile industry and through it, global fashion. In 1960, around 95% of textile fibers were of natural origin, derived from bio-based carbon, and there were no problems with microplastic pollution. All fibers were biodegradable 6.5 decades ago. The world emitted in 1960 9.39 billion metric tons of CO2. Keep that number in mind. Between 1960 and 2023, demand for textile fibers exploded, rising some 650%, 6.5 times fold. Over this time period, the share of synthetic fibers from chemicals and plastics industries grew from 3% of the market in 1960 to 68% of the market in 2023. Those figures come from the Fiber Year 2024 report, and the other figures I'm citing come from a German research institute. I'll mention that again later. As we heard in 2023, there were 16.2 million tons of textile waste generated in the EU alone, much of it consisting of synthetic materials derived from fossil carbon, that is, plastic. So we have transformed the market in fiber over the last 6.5 decades from a natural fiber-based market to one based on synthetics derived from mainly crude oil in the form of polyester and other synthetic materials. Clothing and footwear alone account for 5.2 million tons of this waste stream. That's equivalent to 12 kilograms of waste per person per year in the European Union. And if you balance those two figures out, you're looking at textile waste that's over twice as much as what we associate with fashion. And that's because a lot of textiles go into other products. And we will see when we go into the details a little bit of the new deal that has been struck by the EU institutions. We'll see that what it controls in textile waste, what its ambition is far beyond just apparel and footwear. The carbon footprint of textiles has increased significantly, and the issue of microplastics demands solutions today. The new EU rules I mentioned on extended producer responsibility to the textile waste stream were announced on February 19th, but they have been long in the making, and they are a part of a puzzle piece put together, a package of measures that the European Union has been adopting and is implementing step by step that work in synergistic way to address fashion waste and sustainability of textiles overall. Under the terms of the deal, EU countries would establish extended producer responsibility on new measures to prevent and reduce waste for both food and for textiles. But those will be developed, those schemes of EPR, extended producer responsibility, will be developed at national level in each of the 27 EU countries. And it won't be until 2029 that the European Commission comes back and evaluates each of those national proposals. So the big question mark is, how robust will those schemes be? Will they be adequate to meet the requirements of the new legislation? The new rules cover products such as clothing and accessories, but also footwear, mattresses, blankets, bed and kitchen linen, curtains, and hats. That's for you, Leanne. Also, hats are covered under the new regulation, proposed regulation. The regulation would not come into force for 30 months after it's formally adopted. And I should point out, it has not yet been formally adopted. It has to first be adopted in the second reading. It has to be adopted by the council, and then it goes to Parliament for what's the second reading. And then it becomes, if there's no objection to the council's adoption, then it automatically will turn over and become EU law. But it takes 30 months for that really to enter into force. Very important in this legislation is that the negotiators agree that they want to address ultra fast fashion and fast fashion practices when setting out the financial contributions to the EPR schemes. So it's based on the principle that the polluter pays. The polluter pays for the collection, sorting, and recycling of fashion waste. But those that are making fast fashion, those who are making disposable fashion, those who are using high levels of synthetic materials, they should pay more. But again, that's another point that needs to be monitored as countries come up with their own national schemes. France, for example, has had extended producer responsibility since 2008. So I imagine countries will look to France and look at their experience. And we too, as critics of sustainability in fashion, we should be looking at whether those models are adequate. So I mentioned that these things fit together, and I'm only going to briefly touch on a few other regulations. The regulation requiring the collection of textiles was set up and went into force on the 1st of January of this year. So already countries are building the collection systems. This mechanism, these new rules, when adopted, will pay for that. That is, producers will pay for that. And of course, producers will pass on those costs also to consumers. There is also an important regulation that was adopted last year in 2024 on the shipment of waste, and especially plastic waste, outside of OECD countries, that is to the global south, or what we sometimes call the global south, to Africa, to South America, to Asia, and uniquely also to Turkey, which somehow got through the slippage in this law. But the point there is to shut down the transfer of plastic waste, which should capture also synthetic clothing, and make countries in Europe address their own waste stream. So it's interesting to see how that works together with the collection directive and with the new proposed rules. Blended polyester should go out of fashion based on the new political economy suggested by these rules. Let me pause there. I have more material, but I want to leave time for others to speak, and then we can come back and talk about other solutions that would promote sustainability in the textile waste stream, well, textile market.
Please, Michael, if you want to go on, I mean, you have time.
Well, other measures that we can take, that consumers can take, that producers and designers can take, we should still try to decrease consumer demand for clothing. We need clothing to be more durable and therefore tap down the waste stream for fashion. We also should realize that these regulations are shifting the economics behind fiber. So, for example, with the new collection and EPR requirements, when they're in force, companies will have incentives to recycle material at a higher rate, to use less virgin materials. But already there's a shortage of fine, premier, high-quality recycled fiber. So there's going to be a rush and a competition among private entrepreneurs between the manufacturers to secure that supply line of the material they'll need in order to close the loop on the textile production. And that's quite a challenge. So one of the analysis I mentioned that I've drawn from is a report called Sustainable Textiles, The Way Forward by the Nova Institute in Germany. So this is Dr. Asta Partanen and Michael Karas are the authors of that report, and it was just published this last week. So I've drawn some of the information on fiber markets and their sustainability from this research group. And one thing we've seen is that sustainable fiber markets are in trouble. They're not growing and coming back. They are still losing market share to synthetics. And that's bad news, especially if we're going to address the microplastic and plastic waste stream problems and the associated export, the environmental injustice of sending plastic to the third world or to the developing world to be treated. So these problems link up. There are some hopes that bast fibers, such as jute, which is 75% of the bast fiber market, flax, hemp, rami, other alternatives. These have a small share of the market because they're expensive, and they're expensive because bast fibers are hard to process, unlike cotton, which basically drops off the vine. I'm being poetical here, but you have to do more processing, and so it's more expensive to raise this kind of fiber. But its sustainability, its quality is very good for the environment, very good for design, fun to wear. I have a few items of this kind, and I think there's hope if we could stoke investment in how to make those processing costs come down. I mean, look what we did for solar energy. Solar energy used to be fabulously expensive. Now it's more competitive than carbon, more competitive than petroleum and natural gas. So there are ways that if governments take action and plan their investments carefully, if the research community gets interested, they will find solutions, some technological process solutions that can help bring those costs down. But just also boosting bast fiber markets would boost sustainability for the sector. So that's another area. A third, which the Nova Institute Research Group looks at, are cellulosic fibers and man-made cellulosic fibers, so-called MMCFs, which includes things like viscose and lyocell. And these are mainly derived from wood products, famously good practice from waste wood that otherwise would go into the waste stream, so recycled wood. About 75% of that market, 65% of that market uses wood products that come from sustainable forestry practices. And these are forests that are certified by FSC or PEFC certification programs. So these are recognized by the European Union as sustainable forest practices. Very important to a country like Sweden or Finland, where these forests are the predominant. But that market share needs to increase if this MMCF supply is to grow in market share. There's some optimism that it will. The institute I mentioned thinks that by 2050, we might be able to get back to sustainable fiber as the norm and get synthetics off the market. But other analysts question that because they don't see the investments in man-made cellulosic fibers that would be required to boost that production and substitute that synthetic supply. So there's an interlocking set of things that governments can do, consumers can do, designers can do, producers can do, and some of them have some other issues. For example, in recycling of plastic, which is being pushed heavily by a coalition of countries in the negotiation of a global plastics treaty, those processes are chemically intensive and they cause a lot of pollution and they use a lot of energy as well. So recycling plastic may not be a good pathway to sustainability, but others would say we have plastic pollution, we're producing more and more plastic every year, we have to recycle. So their debates are surrounding issues like what type of plastics are recyclable, which ones are economic, and so on. So there's a few issues I wanted to highlight. for you.
Yeah, excellent, Michael. So my question is, how do you make recycled plastic ethical? How can you reuse? I mean, at the end of the day, it's still plastic. How can you make it ethical? How can you
it still becomes a plastic pollutant. It never, once you make the plastic, you can transform it, but higher energy inputs, leakage from recycling facilities, even state-of-the-art recycling plastic facilities famously leak plastics into the environment. And it's probably not a preferred strategy. On the margins, and for certain types of plastics like PET bottles, it might be good on balance, but there's a lot of questioning of whether this is a sustainable strategy or not. And similarly with some of the cellulosic fibers, viscose and lyocell, there's concerns among the biodiversity community that you might be threatening native forests. You're supposed to be using certified sustainable forests, but we know that's not the case. In many countries of the world, it's actually virgin tropical forests that are being chewed up and converted into these kinds of fibers. So there you have a biodiversity concern. In the other case, you have a chemical pollution, microplastic concern. And so those are, things that have to be addressed if these supplies are to be successfully grown in the marketplace.
Yes, absolutely. Well, amazing, really keynote from Michael. Very insightful. So basically, we need to change the culture. First of all, the customers, the buyers' culture, and using more vintage clothing rather than keep, buying new items every year. And the government should intervene and make plastic or materials like plastic for fashion collection, for fast fashion, more expensive than ethical materials.
We haven't talked about preferred cotton or organic cotton. And there again is a balancing of issues, but the cotton's share of the fiber market is declining, and its wear and tear on the landscape is notorious. Its water consumption is notorious. Its pesticide use, not organic, but the standard cotton. So there are countervailing issues with cotton. Cotton does not look like it's coming back anytime soon.
Okay.